So indeed, I'm going to start. So I've changed a little bit the title since we've evolved since yesterday. So this is now Mechanical Signals in Development. So, well, I'm just going to move directly to the next slide. So this is where we were yesterday. I was showing this feedback loop, which is a mechanical feedback loop. I'm just going to repeat it once more. You're going to hear it a few times more, but just to make sure that everyone is on board. So microtubules in plants are getting the cellulose deposition. This is controlling the direction of cell growth. This is controlling shape, and shape itself is prescribing a pattern of mechanical stress, assuming that the epidermis is under tension, like in a balloon. So you have this pattern of stress that is in turn orienting the microtubules. So we think this is really important to control morphogenesis, because if you control cellulose, you control the load-bearing component of the plant cells, and so that's the shape. So what I want to do today is to look at the implication of this feedback loop and how with such a simple feedback loop we can approach different questions, different developmental questions in a way, that are all based on this loop. And then if I have time, I'll go a little bit beyond this. So first one is proprioception. So what is proprioception? So when you walk, like in this Mulebridge movie, when you walk, actually, so this is a movie that is in a loop, so it's a little bit of a bias, but it's very reproducible. So when you walk, it's very, you can, one step and another, it really looks like the previous one, right? It's very reproducible. So now if you think that your brain is going to tell your muscle to fold in a way, or to stretch, or to contract, you're going to have a movement, but to have it so reproducible, you need the feedback. And so what happens is that in your muscle, there are some stretch sensors that are informing your brain. And so this is really a feedback loop like this, where the system senses itself. So the muscle knows that the brain has said something, but the brain also knows that the muscle has contracted. So it's just this little diagram that shows that, right? So that you have these muscles, the brain, and then this, well, actually this is the medulla, but it goes all the way to the brain. So this is just the idea that you can sense your own deformation in your body. And this is proprioception. So now if you think as growth as a form of deformation, then you can adapt the word or the concept of proprioception to development. And so this is, hopefully I'm not going to go too fast. This is what we call the proprioceptive funnel in a way. So I'm just going to go through it, but it's very, very simple. So you have a lot of cues from the environment. Development is also using the physical forces, as I showed you yesterday. Of course, the molecular network are also important. So these two things are generating a number of shapes, let's say, cell shapes, for instance, but a very much wider possibility than what you get in the end. And what happens here is a selection, if you want, that is channeled in part through this feedback. So one is a mechanical feedback, the other one is a biochemical feedback. And with all this feedback, actually only a subset of these possibilities is going to be here, right? So it's a developmental selection, if you want. But this is a way, this funnel, if you want, it's a bit abstract, huh? But this funnel is a way for the cell to know in which tissue it is, or for the organ to control its own shape. So maybe it's a little bit abstract for now, but I'm going to illustrate this with an example and a key developmental question. But maybe the only take-home message here is that when you have a developmental organism that is growing, it is deforming itself, and as in the proprioception for locomotion, there is also some feedback that are there to sense the shape, to sense the deformation. So, yes?
Yeah, the question was that if you give constant mechanical stress to a growing plant, usually it is the size that is affected, not the shape. So, so then. Yeah.
So indeed. So so I mean, it's true that what you see is usually dwarfer plants, for instance, when they're exposed to wind. So it's because they become stiffer. So this. So I don't have really a good explanation for this. But if you have mechanical stress in all directions, it's going to be in all directions. And so what you're going to affect is mostly the growth rate, but not really the growth direction. And so maybe that's why it's azotropic. But I haven't explored that further.
Olivier, just a comment, not a question. I mean, you're really talking about a funneling thing that many process. And typically in development, you think of it like the Waddington landscape, where it really goes away and differentiates Is there a connection?
So in this case, it's in a different direction, I would say. Here it's more the reproducibility of shapes. It's not the diversity of shapes, it's the reproducibility of shapes, which is a different direction. So here, if you looked in the plane of the board, something, you would get a diversity of shapes also, right? So you would have a funnel in the other direction, in a way, I don't know, in another plane. But in this case, what you get is, instead of having all this variability, in a way, you get always the same shape for one pathway, for instance, for a given path. But maybe it's going to be clearer if I give you one example, because maybe for now it's a little bit too abstract. So here we're going to ask a very central question in development, which is this one: how do organs know when to stop growing? And so this is a key question in development. It was even in Science in 2013 as one of the mysteries of development, for which we don't really have a good answer. And I can tell you that at the end of this talk, I will not provide still a good answer for it, but maybe give you a few cues. So for this question, so maybe just I can give this example. So this is an experiment from Tweety and Schwein in 1931. So what they did is to graft the limb or the bud of a limb from a big salamander to a small salamander, and they swap the experiment, and you see that the organ has the size it should have on the original organism. So in a way that shows that the organ has the possibility or the capability to sense its own shape or to control its own shape. There's some intrinsic control of organ shape. So there is a lot of literature on this. A lot of it comes to positional information, gradients, morphogen. So it's not that I'm excluding this, but I can't talk about this because otherwise we would spend a week on this. So I'm only going to talk about one contribution, and it's the contribution of mechanical signals, since that's the topic of the day. And so for this, I use plants, or we use plants. And so in plants, you know, plants are generating a lot of organs, leaves, flowers, roots, you name it. But all these organs usually are very dependent on the environment. Compared to animals, actually, plants are much, much more dependent on their environment. You see bigger or smaller leaves, actually that's what Utpal was touching upon. Except for maybe one organ that is really, really controlled, is the floral organ. So within the flower, the organs like these sepals, these petals, these stamens, and this is the pistil. So these are the sexual organs, and these are just the petals and the sepals. These ones are much more controlled in shape, and this would make sense from an evolutionary perspective, right? Because this is where you have the reproduction, so you need to have some kind of reproducibility for this organ. This is actually not always the case, and there are plants with variable organ number, for instance. But anyway, so in Arabidopsis, at least, if you look at the sepal, which is the outermost floral organ, so the most accessible also, you have on one individual plant 60 flowers. And so that means that if you look at always the same sepal, which is the abaxial one in this case, you're going to have 60 almost identical sepal. And this is very competitive because now you can look at the variability of organ shape for one single individual, so genetically identical. And we can look at the reproducibility of this sepal shape. So you could think as this as a Drosophila wing or anything, right? This is just a model to look at organ shape reproducibility. Okay, so it looks like this. So what we do with this, so like Utpal was mentioning, we are measuring growth, right? We want to measure deformation, so in this case, growth. So we have different tools, but I'm showing this one because we were using it quite a bit. So it's a free software, so you can use it. It's on Linux. So Morphographics, it's been developed by the team of Richard Smith in Cologne. It's used on plant stuff, but also on animals. And that's why I'm mentioning this. It's ecumenic in a way. You can use it on anything you want. So what it does is that you have a stack of images, like a confocal microscopy also. It could be any kind of microscopy, actually. It builds this, it recognizes the edges of the object. And on the edge, it builds a mesh like this, so at the surface of the object. So in this case, this is a floral bud, like a very, very young flower with a dome of cells. And here you see the two sepals, and the two other sepals are going to grow later on. There is a mesh here, and on this mesh, now with the fluorescent signal that you have here in the tissue, you can project the fluorescent signal on this surface. But it's a folded surface, right? So it's a 2.5D surface. So you project the signal, but you can select the width of signal you project. So in this case, we can project 1 to 5 micrometer of signal on this surface. And you see what you obtain, right? You only obtain the signal close to the surface. So this is a very simple way to have a surface in 3D. So that way you can measure growth and you know that what you're going to measure. So once you've segmented the cells and then measure the growth, you know that you really have the growth of the cell in 3D, at least at the surface, right? I mean, it's in 3D, the surface is in 3D, but it's only the surface of the object. And for, yeah. This one? Yeah, the color code doesn't mean anything. This is just a segmentation. Yeah. Yeah, I'll show you some growth maps later on. Okay, and so this is what we get. So if we do a growth map for every single cell in the sepal, so this is a young sepal, this is an old sepal, and this looks a lot like what Utpal showed for the leaf. In red, so that means that it's a high growth rate. Blue, it's a low growth rate. And you see that it starts early on with a fast growth rate at the tip. So this is the tip of the sepal, this is the bottom. And then you see that the maximum of growth is displaced towards the bottom of the sepal. So not only there is this gradient, but actually it moves with time. And so, okay, so that's the growth, okay? But actually when you see this, and you're interested in mechanical signals, what you see immediately is that there is a mechanical conflict in this organ. This part here is growing fast, this part is growing slowly. So this means that this part here is growing fast, is going to pull on the tip, right? If you grow fast, you could pull like this, right? It's not cell size, it's really growth rate. The cells are not necessarily bigger or smaller, it's just the growth. Yep. So there's cell division or no cell division. It's only increase in volume. Actually, it's only increase in surface area. So growth is really irreversible increase in volume. In this case, we only look at the surface, so it's an irreversible increase in surface area. And what we see is that here, there is an increase in surface area that is much higher than here. So it's as if, I should have a piece of textile, but you have here, we pull way more here than here, and so here you're going to have a tension, right, between these two parts. So since I showed you that the microtubules are aligning with tension, of course it's tempting to look at the microtubule in this tissue. So we can introgress some microtubule marker in this tissue too. So these are this is the same sepal grown over time. So this is every 12 hours. So plants are very slow to grow. It's not like an animal embryo where you would have like, I don't know, many embryos by that time. And so this is the stage where we have actually this differential growth between the two domains. And what we see is this, so this is quite noisy. So see, you have the tip that is growing slowly, or more slowly, and this is the part that is growing faster. So you see that the microtubules are quite chaotic, actually, and there's a bit of random orientation in this part. But here, I don't know if you can see, I really kept the raw image so that I don't touch it, but there is a bias towards this orientation for the microtubules. Can you see it, or it's noisy, I'll give you that. It seems to be working, at least from this point of view, but it's not completely satisfying because indeed it's a bit noisy. It seems to match the tension, but still it's not completely clear. So we did an experiment to see if we can increase this response and to see if it's a valid one. So what we did was to use oryzalene, which is an equivalent of colchicine. So we depolymerized the microtubule, we removed the microtubule. For a while, the cells are growing isotropically, so they're growing in all directions. Actually, they are going to grow a little bit faster. Then we look at what happens to the microtubule. And what we see is this. And in this case, we've almost completely denoised the pattern. So now the microtubules are only like this. So what happened in this case is that when you grow isotropically and faster, actually you're going to pull even more on the tip, right? Is this clear? So you have the center of the sepal that is growing fast, and now even more isotropically. So that means that you're going to grow even more in that direction. And so you're pulling even more on the tip in that direction. So the microtubules are going to align even more.
So Olivier, you can actually quantify this polarity of the microtubules?
Yeah, I'll show you later. Yeah, we have some tools to yeah, I don't show the quantification, but we quantified it, yeah. So it's very, I mean, in this case, it's like, yeah, it's huge and isotropy. Okay, so this is, okay, satisfying. So this means that when the organ is growing, there is this differential growth, and somehow the cells are seeing the differential growth by aligning their microtubules. So now we are asking a different question, is whether this response can affect the organ shape. And here, this is a model where we, so this is actually either the stress or the Mach tubules. So in this case, it's the Mach tubules, but it's the same because they're parallel, right? And so you see here, this is only the tip of the sepal. So in the wild type, so let's say an intermediate response to stress, like an average. So you see this stress would be like this. So I removed the center part of the sepal just to show the tip. So you have this alignment of stress in this zone just because you pull like this. If you have a higher response to stress, in the model, you see indeed that well, you have a higher response to stress, but what it affects the shape, which is quite actually this is very intuitive, right? Because if you have more cellulose like this, you reinforce in this direction, and so you allow more growth in that direction or more deformation in that direction, right? It's like you reinforce in this direction and less in that direction. And if you have a lower response to stress, then the cellulose is there's less cellulose, let's say, or it's less well aligned. And what you see is that you have a sort of fatter sepal. It grows a little bit more because here again you have the center of the sepal that is pulling on it, right? So this is resisting less, and you have a flatter sepal. And so we have mutants in which we can test that, and we see this trend. So this would be this is a wild type where we have the regular size. And the spiral 2, so this is a mutant in which we have a faster response to mechanical stress. I'm not going to give you the molecular details for this, but there is a faster response. So here I only show the tip, but actually it's really like this. It's also more elongated and more pointy. And this one is a mutant that is slower. So the Mach tubules are slower to respond to stress. So there's also a lower response to stress, and you see that it's flatter at the tip. Okay, so that's it for the first story. So it's a very, very simple story, but this is a consequence of the feedback loop I showed you earlier. The Mach tubules, but also all the hormones, morphogen and everything, they're going to induce a growth pattern, or they're going to well, make a growth pattern. This growth pattern is inducing mechanical conflicts, and this mechanical conflicts is inducing tension here in the tip, that is in turn controlling the Mach tubule. And so this is in some ways a proprioception mechanism, because you see that depending on the stage at which you are, as the sepal grow, you're going for the cells that are depending on where they are, they will know at which the stage of the sepal and at which position they are in the sepal. Right? It's one way to control the organ shape. So something that is interesting that we've explored a little bit, but I'm not going to show you, is that after this, so if you grow, if you let the sepal grow even more, in the same zone here, there is some reactive oxygen species that are induced later on, and these ones are actually going to stiffen the wall even more. That means that early on, these cells are trying to resist tension by aligning their cellulose in the direction of maximal tension. Later on, apparently it's not sufficient because the sepal is still pulling on the tip. So there is a secondary response, which is actually to induce reactive oxygen species to fully stiffen the wall, and then the cells are dying, basically. They are going to be, I mean, not completely dead, but they are not going to be able to expand anymore. They're going to be really, really stiff. So you see that this is one mechanism, one of the many mechanisms that is triggering growth arrest in the organ. And so that's one of the mechanisms where the organ would know when to stop growing. Of course, it's not the mechanism, it's just one of the many mechanisms. Okay, so just to make a little parallel with animals, because this was in plants, of course, sepal. So there's been some studies on this mechanical conflicts in animal organs. So I'm just showing you two examples. So this is from the team of Christian Daman in Germany. So what you see here is two expression domains in the Drosophila wing. And what I want to show you here is that the separation between the two expression domains is a straight line. Maybe that's not something you thought about before, but it's actually very often the case that between expression domain, it's a straight line. It's not like a rugged or ruffled line or a wavy line. It's often a straight line. And so in a very very shortcut way, what they found is that actually there is tension here. So what happens in this case is that the maximal tension is like this. So you have a line of cells that are under high tension, and this high tension is preventing these cells from moving to this compartment, and these cells from moving to that compartment. And the easiest way to make a straight line is to pull on it, right? It's very intuitive, right? So otherwise, I mean, there are other ways. You can do it biochemically. It works very well as well. But just by pulling on it, you get a straight line, and that's it. Actually, this is what happens when you look at a tomato that has a very smooth surface. It's just because it's inflated. It's the tension that makes it smooth. It's not like it's not so genetically controlled. It's basically an output from the jug of pressure. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So they're both contributing to the same thing. So there's probably a lot of cooperation between the two and synergies. So this is one case, and another one that actually was published the same year as when we published it, that is very homologous to what we showed in the CIPL. So it's Ken Irvine team, and what they found is that so it's again in the Drosophila wing. So there is this differential growth that generates tension. So what would be, yeah, actually it's not on this graph, but yeah, here tension. So the cytoskeleton is responding to it, and actually this is inducing the EPO signaling pathway, which is the mechanotransduction pathway. And so you see that even in the Drosophila, it's really the homologous idea in a way. You have differential growth, the cells are sensing the mechanical conflict that is emerging from differential growth, and they can induce a transduction pathway downstream of this that will change the fate of the cells. Okay, so that's for the large-scale effect. But I want to move straight to this. So I showed you a growth map of CIPL like this, with the tip growing more slowly than the base. But actually, if we are really serious about this, we see that it's quite heterogeneous within one domain, right? So if you compare one cell and another, okay, all this is growing fast, but actually there are some cells that grow fast next to slower growing cells. And the same goes for the slow growing cells. There's always a few fast growing cells in the mix. So it's not completely like, it's not average. Huh? It's really heterogeneous. And yet at the end, you always have the same shape. And I told you, especially for the sepal, if you have 60 flowers, you're going to have 60 identical sepal, or close to identical sepal. And there's an additional factor, is that all these cells have different identities. So for instance, there are stomata, these cells, the pavement cells that are more or less elongated. There's some giant cells in the sepal that are in red here. There's also some trichomes. So this is an additional heterogeneity. In this case, it's cell identity, identity heterogeneity, if you want, but still in the end, reproducible shape. Okay, so how can we explain this? What is it? Is this just white noise? It's completely useless. And then something else that controls the shape, or is this contributing somehow to the organ shape that we see at the end? So here I'm focusing only on one cell type, which is the trichome, this one. So these are air cells, basically. And why do we focus on these ones? Because these cells, there's a lot of studies and also mechanical characterization that show that these cells are growing much faster than their neighbors. So this is a very easy cell to follow, because in the end, it turns into a trichome. So a posteriori, we can go back to what it was before. And we know that they're growing much faster than their neighbor. So this is a case of heterogeneity that we can track in time. Actually, you can see that it's growing much faster than a neighbor, because actually the cell is even bulging out at some point over the surface, right? So it really is growing faster. And by the way, yep, I shouldn't. So we know why it's growing faster. So there is more trigger pressure in those cells. Somehow it's a little bit isolated from the rest, at least for a while. And the cell wall is also softer. So if you have more trigger pressure, so more osmotic pressure, and a weaker wall, that's the recipe for a really fast growth, right? Okay, so with the same Richard Smith, he made a model, a FEM model. Oh, yeah, it doesn't work so well when I oh, that's it. Okay, so this is the trichome growing faster than the neighbor. You see the white lines are the maximal tension. And so what happens is then when you have a fast growing cell and they're all glued to one another, right? It's in plants, there's no migration, no intercalation, so they're all glued to one another. So when there is one cell that is growing faster than the neighbor, actually it's very intuitive again. Each wall here, each anticlinal wall here is going to be pulled, right? I think this is quite intuitive. And so this is what you get. You have circumferential stress. So ironically, it's like having an ablation. Huh? You remember yesterday when we did an ablation, it was also a circumferential stress. So of course, it's this for a very different reason, but in this case, it's the same pattern. So now, of course, we want to know if the cells, the neighboring cells, indeed are able to sense this. Can the macrotubule, in particular, respond to this local tension? And so for this, that's to answer Utpal. So we've developed a tool in ImageJ. Again, it's free, so easy to download. Very, very simple. It's based on nematic tensors. And what you do is you basically define a region of interest. You click once, and it gives you a red line here that is giving you the average orientation of the arrays in the region of interest. And the length of the red line is proportional to the anisotropy of the arrays. So if the arrays are very well aligned, you will have a long red line, and if they are not very well aligned, you'll have a short red line. So it's called the Fibol tool. But we have a collaborator, Satoru Tsugawa, who actually improved the tool and made it in a supracellular scale in a way, like you don't even have to define the region of interest. And so this is the type of image we got. So this is actually one of the first images we got. I still show this one. I mean, we have better images, but just the very first one that came out. So this is, again, every 12 hours. Again, slow is quite, growth is quite slow. So the black T is the trichome. So this cell is growing faster than the neighbors, you see, at least from the surface, right? It's growing faster than the neighbor. And the red lines are the local alignment of microtubules. And you see that while in the beginning there is various orientation, but at this point here, you see that there is a bias towards this circumferential orientation. And so again, this we can quantify. Here I'm just showing you the quantified microtubule, but you can quantify the alignment, of course. So it stays like this for a while, so 36, 48 hours. And then at some point, we lose the alignment. And actually, this corresponds to the stage where the trichome stops growing in the XY plane, but starts growing along the Z direction. And which is also interesting, because in this case, the trichome is not pushing on the neighbor or not pulling on the neighboring walls. It's actually only growing in the Z direction. So actually, you don't stress the neighboring cells anymore, right? And then you lose the alignment. Yeah. So you mean the red lines here?
Yeah, so there's a kind of a sudden movement in one direction, but there's no new mechanical force coming at this stage, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, at this stage here, when it starts to grow vertically, yeah, it's actually what we think is happening is that the load of stress is transmitted to the trichome. Actually, it's using the stress to actually grow in that direction.
So there's a change in the direction of the stress.
Well, actually, we don't really know exactly what happens, but at least we know that until that point here.
Yeah, so until that it's going like this way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then maybe at some point the walls are stiffer enough. So I mean, one possibility, an optimistic scenario, but that I can't really tell, is that the walls have been stiffened so much on the side that the trichome cannot expand anymore. It's still full of trigger pressure and with a softer wall, so it goes in that direction. That's the only escape.
So if you compare that with yesterday, your ablation, it's just opposite, right? You made a hole there.
Yeah.
And then you check the microtubule, and here you are causing opposite direction force. So,
well, actually,
because it's pressuring, putting pressure on the.
Yeah.
So, do you see the similar microtubule in both the cases, or?
So in this case, yeah, that's the microtubule actually. So
yeah, right.
Are circumferential, like in the ablation, but in the ablation, it's a little bit different because the stress is circumferential because the epidermis is under tension. If you kill one cell, you're going to have a circumferential orientation, and the microtubules are aligning with this. In this case, it's very much a local effect. So actually, even whether you have tension or not, you're still going to have this response of the microtubule. So it's always going to be a circumferential. Actually, the fact that there is tension in the epidermis makes it a little bit less strong. If there was no tension at all in the epidermis, the stress pattern would be even higher, even more circumferential. Sorry, yeah.
So do you know if the microtubules are also aligned in the polar sense? In the sense, do you pick out the polarity of the microtubules, or is it only that?
They're in both directions.
So it's a random alignment, it's a nematic alignment.
Okay, so that's actually, so if I stay here, so that means that at some point, so when you have this fast-growing cell, the neighboring cells are able to sense that the neighbor is growing fast, and they are reinforcing their wall with this microtubule / cellulose. So what we propose is that this is what we call mechanical shielding. So that means when you have a fast-growing cell, actually what happens is that the neighboring cells are going to stiffen themselves and avoid this fast-growing cell to impact too far, right? So you're going to isolate this fast-growing cell mechanically with this ring of stiff walls, right? So just to make a little comparison with animal cells, this would be something interesting to follow, I think, in animals when cells are dividing. For instance, when you have one dividing cells, the stress pattern is changing completely, and I would be very curious to see what happens to the neighboring cells. I'm sure there would be some transient response, probably. Okay, but that's at the very local level, so this is not addressing the question of organ shape reproducibility. And so, again, we did, so this is the work by Mathilde Dumont, so we did a 2D model of the sepal, in which we add more or less trichome, and in which we put more or less feedback. Actually, yeah, retraction should be a feedback. So you have here a CPL, so it's a 2D model, FEM model, in which the only thing we impose is anisotropic growth. So just to have a shape that looks a little bit like a CPL. So there's a little bit more growth in this direction than in the other direction. So that's why it's a little bit elongated. That's the only thing we put in the model. We add trichomes. So when we add trichomes, when we do is that we put some soft elements in the mix. So we just add 2 soft points, 4 soft points, randomly, random positions, or 6 soft points. And when you do that, if you have a soft point, it's like having a fast-growing cell, right? It's like having a softer cell wall. And then we see what happens to the contour of the sepal. And you see that when there is no retraction, so when you only add these soft spots, there is all this gray here, that is all the superimposed contour. So you see that the contour can be more or less variable. There is some variability in the shape. If now you add a feedback, so that means that instead of only adding a soft spot, you also add a stiff ring around the soft spot. And again, it's very, very intuitive. So if you add a soft spot and a stiff ring around the soft spot, then it's not going to propagate too far, right? And then you have shapes that are much more reproducible. You see the gray is less variability here than here. So what we predict from this model, which is very intuitive again, is that when you have a feedback, if you are able to filter out the fast-growing cells, then the shape is going to be more reproducible. So is this true in reality? And so we go back to the experiments. So now we are measuring the contour of a true sepal. So this is the wild type. You see like various, it's like something like 200 sepals contour. And now we are going to measure the width here. This is the one actually on the model that is the one that is the most affected by the stress in this case. We only look at the width, and you see that if we increase the number of trichome, so it's the same color code as here. So if you increase the number of trichome, actually there is no effect on width, which would be consistent with the fact that here there is a feedback. So it's in the wild type. The microtubules are aligning with maximal tension. They are exerting mechanical shielding of fast-growing cells, so they are filtering the fast-growing cells. And so in the end, whether you have 0 or 10 trichomes, it's the same. There is no effect on shape. And now, if I use another mutant, so the Catalin mutant, which is one of the mutants I showed earlier, so in this mutant, you have a reduced response to stress. So you see that the shape, again, it's a flat tip, as always, so the shape is affected. But in this case, we have a correlation with trichome number. So if you increase the trichome number, actually you have a wider sepal. And this actually was predicted by the model. So if you add these soft spots and there is no feedback, you actually increase the width. So this is where it's going to have the most impact. So we tried on other mutants, but again, I'm not going to go through the list. So but it seems to be true each time we look. What I should point out, this is a small effect. This is not like a major effect. It's just adding a little bit more robustness in the organ shape. Yep, no, absolutely. That's we can't exclude that. So that's why the Catalin would not be enough. So we need also to look at other mutants. Yeah. I'm just showing you one, but yeah, I agree. So this is the conclusion for this part. So if you have an organ with fast-growing cells, if you don't do anything, if you just let these fast-growing cells do their job, they're going to grow faster and they're going to distort the tissue. And so in the end, you're going to have viable organ shapes. But if you are able to sense this growth heterogeneity a posteriori, you're going to like stiffen like around like this stiffen ring, and you're going to filter out those fast-growing cells. And in the end, you're going to have organ shape reproducibility. So you see that, and I think that's well, so yeah, that's the. I'm just showing this image because this is actually this fits really well. So if you look at the older trichomes, so actually this is in leaves, you see these cells are very well elongated around. Like these are called the socket cells. They are very elongated, which is matching very well the macrotubule orientation, right? Because the macrotubules are supposed to be circumferential, so the cellulose should be also like this. And so that means that you're going to allow the cell to grow in this direction, but not in this direction. So even when you look at the final output of the cell growth, it's matching the macrotubule orientation. Just to put these two stories together, this is again a multi-scale idea. So if the macrotubule dynamics is controlled by this Catalin and other factors, this is allowing the cell to respond to mechanical stress. This allows neighboring cells to know if the neighbor cell is growing faster or slower. So you can have a local response of the mactubule. All this is contributing to the growth pattern, which itself is sensed by the cells at the regional level. And in this case, the tip was under tension and the mactubules were aligning. So you see it's all, I mean, of course, I'm excluding all the biochemical factors, the hormones, the gene network. Of course, they're here and coupled to all this. But this is, I'm just focusing on the contribution of mechanics here. You see that all this is going to contribute to the robustness of organ shapes. Okay, so that's a summary for the first part. So I told you about proprioception, perception of deformation in the context of growth and development. And so in this case, using mechanical signals, differential growth can be perceived and trigger a response, and the idea of mechanical shielding that is filtering growth heterogeneity. Okay. So I'm going to move to just one example that I think is interesting because it relates to us. Oh, yeah, sorry. In general, so is there a relation between the overall growth rate and the organ size? So the short answer is no. There's a lot of compensation. So if you if you take you can have the same organ shape in the end through a lot of cell division or through very little cell division. Actually, what happens is apparently and it's a bit mysterious, huh? But the cells are able to know whether the organ is big enough or not. And so they're going to, if, for instance, you take a mutant that is impaired in cell division, for instance, is not able to divide, you would expect that the organ is going to be smaller. Actually, what happens is that the cells are going to grow faster or be bigger in the end. And in the end, you have an organ that is the same size as the wild type. There is compensation. It's not as simple as having a growth rate predicting organ size. Okay, no more question on the organ scale. I'm going to scale down now to the cell scale, where there are some things like this. And yeah.
Commenting is probably growth rate and organ shape. The correlation is probably specific to a species, because when you measure the growth rate in different species, we see as a great deal of diversity in growth rate, even though the shapes are pretty similar. So yeah, within the...
So yeah, I'm very Arabidopsis oriented, so you're right. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move to the cell shape, because you saw maybe, I don't know, maybe some people paid attention, but when the cells are differentiated in the leaves, they make this puzzle shape like this. Utpal showed a few images, like in different species actually, and it's something that you really see broadly. Huh? You see a lot of cells having this shape. So these are called pavement cells, jigsaw puzzle shaped pavement cells. So they are in the epidermis, and they are very frequent in leaves. And you see they have this interdigitated, so they're very fun, and they've been studied a lot in Arabidopsis, but also in other species, but in Arabidopsis especially. So we know, yep.
So these are still normal plant cells with a thick cell wall, or do they have something weird about the cell wall already?
It's the same plant cells, they are a bit more differentiated. So indeed, the cell wall is a bit thicker. But otherwise, they still have trigger pressure, they're still under tension.
So they still follow those rules, right?
Yeah, and they're still growing. Yeah. Okay, so for these cells, the mechanics is well known in a way, like the basic mechanics, trigger pressure, cell wall stiffness. But we know also a lot at the molecular level. So there's a lot of regulator that we know. I'm not going to go into this because, well, I don't have the time, but also because this is not really what I want to talk about. I just want to show you that there's been a lot of studies. I don't know many papers on this because this is a multipolar cell. I mean, there's a lot of interesting information on this. But actually, when you focus so much on the molecular network, sometimes you miss actually some of the basic mechanics that goes in those cells. And this is what I want to show you as an example of what mechanics can bring to questions in developmental biology. And so one of the mechanical assumptions that were somewhat hidden in this network, engine network, is that to get these interdigitated cells, when you have a lobe is growing into the neighboring cell. Make a lobe like this. So you have a local difference that makes the cell grow into another one, like an invasion, if you want, or the cell pushing on the neighbor. The other assumption is that there would be, so you have a mactubule that would be in those regions here, like where you see, there would be more mactubule that would stiffen the cell wall, so the wall would be stiffer. And the function, so there are different functions that have been proposed for this, but the one that was really put forward was increasing the cell surface to increase the intercellular communication. So all this is possible hypothesis, but it was not really tested mechanically. So I'm just going to show you 3 very small stories where we've actually addressed some of these questions. So the mechanic of the pavement cell is very similar. So trigger pressure, the wall is like this. So when you have cylindrical cell, elongated cell, it's like the sausage on the barbecue from yesterday. The stress is twice higher in this direction, and so the cellulose is going to be oriented like this. So for a cylindrical cell, it's very simple. You'll have the hoops of cellulose like this following maximal tension. So when we look at pavement cell, of course, the shape is much more complex. And what we see is this. So the macrotubules are much more disorganized, I would say. But actually what you see is that the macrotubules tend to align indeed in the neck regions, in the indentation. So they align like this. They sort of gather in the necks. And they're a little bit less present in the lobes. So this seems to be working with if we think that the macrotubules are going to deposit the cellulose, so this is going to be stiffer here. And so this would make sense, right, if you have a balloon analogy for the cell, right? Actually, I think I have an image for this. You have a cell like this, you stiffen locally, and then you make a puzzle shape. Very simple. Well, we need to confirm that, and so for this, we use some tools, but here we're not at the tissue level anymore, so we need to be at the cell level. So there are some tools to measure the stiffness of a cell, or even like at the subcellular scale. And so one of them is atomic force microscopy, AFM. And so the principle is it's very simple. So you have a small cantilever that you approach on the surface. And then if the material is stiff, the cantilever is going to bend immediately. And if the material is soft, it's going to go into the material and then bend. So there's a delay in the bending, right? So what you need to have is a laser here to measure the deflection, so the bending of the cantilever. And if you can record this, then you have an image of the stiffness of your material. You need also to know the stiffness of the cantilever, of course. With that, you can get the stiffness of your material. So this is used a lot in material sciences. So we can do that on plant tissues. They're solid also, so it's very easy to do. We do that in water and room temperature, very simple. And so this is the type of map you get. So this is the interface between two pavement cells. So they are bulgy, they are turgid, fully inflated. And so you can get this topography, let's say, at very high resolution. But more interestingly, you get a stiffness map of the pavement cell. So here you see, so white is stiff and black is soft. So you see, of course, the contour of the cell. So these are the anticlinal wall. But hopefully you can see some white lines here, 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 a little bit everywhere. So there's some white lines. So those white lines are local wall stiffening. White is stiff, right? So this is really matching the macrotubule network that I showed earlier and the predicted cellulose network. And so this would mean that indeed both cells are stiffened between the necks. So the model seems to work. We also, no, they're alive, huh? Yeah, they're alive, yeah. And we have a positive control, which is the STATA, for which there's been a lot of studies to show where the cellulose is, where the macrotubules are. So these are elongated cells, and they are just bean-shaped, but they're elongated. So the macrotubules and the cellulose is like this. And you see that, of course, it's a bit difficult because this is point by point. So it takes this takes an afternoon to make this image. This is very long. So that's why actually the slow growth of plant cell is great, because we can allow this. But you see that the cellulose is in this orientation, so this is indeed something that we are measuring the stiffness of the wall. Okay, so this is true. We confirm that part. Indeed, the macrotubules are aligned, and they stiffen the wall locally. So of course, the next question is, what is orienting the macrotubules? So again, there are many hypotheses showing that auxin molecular pathways are doing this through exclusion mechanism between Rho GTPase, and this is true. I'm sure it's true. But again, I just want to look at the mechanical contribution, not to oppose the two. It's just another ingredient in the mix. And so when we calculate the pattern of stress on these cells, it's a little bit more complicated because now it's not a cylinder. So we would need to have a sausage with that shape to put on the barbecue to get the stress map. But actually, it's kind of simple. So what you look at it here, so this is a FEM model, so finite element model for the surface, and the anticlinal wall are modeled as vertical springs. We fix the shape of the cell and we inflate the top wall. And what you see, the red lines are the maximal tension lines. And you see that maximal tension is converging in the necks, right? Which is very intuitive. So I always take this example with my t-shirt, but if you pull on a textile, there's going to be some ruffling that is converging towards where you pull. So this is a little bit similar to this, right? So here, because you inflate from beneath and you fix the boundary, the tension is going to converge in this direction. So you see a good match between the maximal tension lines and the Mach tubules. So it's the same story that what I've been telling you earlier, but this time at the sickle cell level. So there's a subcellular pattern of Mach tubule and stress. And again, we can do the modelization. So again, we do a little ablation. So this is really homologous to what I showed earlier. So if you ablate a few cells, the Mach tubules are going to be becoming circumferential. Right? So you can forget about the color code. So the Mach tubules the stress is becoming like this. And when we do the experiment, so we can go fast, the Mach tubules are also aligning like this. So here again, the Mach tubules are aligning with stress. So here you see that it's exactly like what I showed you for the meristem, but this time at the single cell level. The Mach tubules are reinforcing the wall. This is controlling cell shape, and the shape of the cell is sufficient to prescribe a mechanical stress pattern that is orienting the Mach tubule. So again, there is some analogy with what we can find in animals, but I'm not going to go too much into this. Okay, so this is one point. So we've sort of validated that indeed the Mach tubule stiffen the walls and this restricts growth in the necks. There was another assumption that the lobes are growing into the neighbor. And so there is a mechanical problem with this. Because if you have a lobe growing into a neighbor, then there is compression locally, right? You compress the neighboring cell. Whereas we said that the entire epidermis is under tension. So how can you make a wavy wall if you pull on it, right? Actually, do you have an idea? How can you, if the only thing I want is you pull on a sheet of paper, for instance, and when you pull, it's straight in the beginning, you pull on it, and it makes this at the end when you pull. Do you have any idea how you can do that? It's a tough one. So Stuart actually sort of gave a little indication for this, but or maybe I can show you because this is a difficult one. So this is what Paweł Krupinski and the team of Henrik Johnson did. So this is only the anticlinal wall this time. So you have only this is just a square cell. You pull on it, and so the red and blue are different mechanical properties. So in this case, for instance, you try with walls with stiff, soft, for instance. You pull on it, right here, and when you pull on it, nothing happens, right? You just have the stiff part or the soft part deforming more or less, but at the end, you still have a straight line. So this is the trick. What you need to do is to have one face stiff and the other face soft, and then you alternate. And it's stiff, soft, soft, stiff, right? So you have a mechanical heterogeneity that is across and along the wall. And when you do that, when you pull on it, actually you have buckling, local buckling, and when you pull on it, you generate a wavy wall. So this scenario is compatible with an epidermis under tension. And I think that's pretty much the only one that would work. I mean, at least it's one of the most parsimonious if we have to have epidermis under tension. Yep. In B? So no, because actually what happens is that so the softer walls are going to extend very quickly, but the stiffer one are going to resist. But in the end, you still have a straight line. It's like if you have a stiff spring and a soft spring, you pull on it, it's still going to be a straight line. What you would need is, but it's difficult with springs, but only with springs, if you alternate stiff and soft and you pull on it, it's still going to be a straight line. You need to have a mechanical conflict in the other direction as well. Yeah, maybe I should actually maybe redraw it because it's a bit small. Yeah, I'm going to try red. So we basically have something like this. Let's say that white is stiff. And so this is what when you pull like this, you're going to have a mechanical conflict between the two faces, right? Because the one is going to deform more than the other, and so each one is going to bend in one direction, right? It's a pity I don't have an analog model for this, because this starts to be a little bit complicated, but maybe intuitively, you see that if they are glued to one another, right? I mean, the two cell walls are glued to one another, right? So they have to be following whatever. So if this one is deforming more, then you have to be like this, right? And if this one is deforming more, then you have to bend like this, right? And since they're attached, in a way, then you have a wavy wall. Where's my... Okay. So that's the prediction from the model. Yeah, it's clear enough. Yep. Yes, so it's assuming homogeneous turgor pressure. Good point. Again, it's very parsimonious to assume that turgor pressure is homogeneous, because there is plasmodesmata, so the cells can exchange a lot of water, also goes through the cell wall. So, well, of course, it's not exactly that. There's always some heterogeneity, but let's say that it's homogeneous. So we can do, again, atomic force microscopy on this. So here we are really reaching the limit of what we can do. So in this case, you make a section in resin. So this is fixed tissue in this case. So that means that the value you're going to get with atomic force microscopy is not the reality, but at least you can see if there are some ratio in stiffness between one face or the other, and if you have this alternance along the perimeter of the cell. And this is what we see. You can see it here. You see differences between side A and side B, for instance. So these are small differences, but strong enough actually in the model to induce a wavy wall. But if I only add this AFM data, I would be very suspicious, because we are really at the limit of what we can do. The walls are very small, 1 micrometer thick, so it's pretty small. There is another piece of information that Mathieu Majda brought that is very nice, is that actually when you look at some of the wall components, some of them are actually polarized, and they alternate like this. So that means that chemically, the wall is looking like this, actually. So if you look at certain components, I mean, of course, there are many components that are everywhere. There's no polarity, there's no distribution, but some of them are going like this. So they are on one side and on the other. And they're like this before it falls as well. So with these two pieces of information, then this model seems to be true. So this actually means that this idea, we don't really believe it anymore. We really think that this is tension all the way. And the last part is probably something that you wondered. Why are these cells lobed? Why are they like this? Why do they have a puzzle shape? So there is this idea that it's increasing the surface. But with Richard, we actually explored another hypothesis, which is a mechanical hypothesis. What if these cells are lobed like this to manage stress level, to manage mechanical stress level? So this is a map of mechanical stress in a pavement cell, again using a finite element method. And red is high stress, blue is low stress. So you see that you have a difference in stress intensity. You see again maximal stress in the necks, like in the earlier model. But I'm going too fast, because this is really the key example here. So if you have a small cell, like a cube, and you want to increase the volume of that cell, the cell is growing, and if that cell is growing isotropically, so it's growing in all directions, so it means that a small cube would be a big cube, so it's the isometric version in a way. What you see on the model is that the stress is becoming much higher. And this is again quite intuitive, because if you have a big cell, then you have this large curvature, so it's like a large bridge in a way, and so you're going to increase the stress level. As you grow, as the cell is growing, the stress is going to be higher in the cell wall, because you have this huge curvature. Now, one way to reduce this is to do this, so it's to grow only in one direction. Yeah. Yeah, so, well, no, so I don't remember. No, I think in this case there was no neighbors. So I think this is actually, it shows actually that the stress is mostly in the top part here. And I don't remember the cause because actually we had a debate about this. Because actually it's debated this. I read a paper where actually there was higher stress in the junction. So I'm not sure I would be in the best position to address that. At least with this assumption in this model, which is probably the simplest, and it's just like a balloon with a shape as a cube. And you increase the stress here as you grow in volume. But if you don't want, if you grow only in one direction, now you have only a small curvature, and you grow along this direction, and you see that the stress level stays blue, so the stress level is quite low. And so I'm not sure this makes sense, but it's again, yep.
Sorry, I'm puzzled by one point. As the cell becomes bigger, shouldn't you expect the curvature to decrease?
Yeah, so actually, right now, actually they're flatter, yeah, so you're right, yeah. You mean like the...
So why does the stress increase? I'm a bit puzzled.
So yeah, I use this analogy. So it's probably not the best analogy, but yeah, I can just use. So that's the one I used in one of the groups actually, the tutorial group. So if you want to build a bridge, a small bridge, you're going to make an arch like this, and you're going to use a certain amount of material. If you want to build a bigger bridge, you have a bigger arch, and you need to get more material because you need to resist more gravity in a way. I mean, the gravity is the same, but you need more material to resist gravity because you have a larger arch. And if you have an even larger arch, then you really have to use a lot of material. So in this, it's a little bit what we see here. The only difference is that it's in tension, not in compression. But when you have this huge arch like this, and you have tension pulling on it, then the stress level is increasing. And so the only way you can resist to stress when you have a big cell like this is if you make a really thick cell wall to resist tension. I mean, it's a bit intuitive. I wish Richard was here to explain the model a bit more in detail. But I think, as far as I can tell, in the model, it's really the simplest possible. Huh? It's really like a balloon analogy. Yeah, actually, I can use the balloon analogy as well. Huh? So if you have a small balloon and you keep inflating it, it's going to explode at some point, right? And the stress is going to be higher. It's the same for the soap bubble. Huh? The small soap bubble are quite resistant. The big soap bubble are exploding very quickly.
So I have a problem with this balloon analogy, actually. So because in case of a balloon, we have fixed material in which we are blowing. But when a cell is growing, that's not the case. We don't have fixed number of cell wall materials. They are also growing, and
yeah, they're adding material. Yeah, absolutely. So that's why actually what happens is that, so this is in the case where there is no addition of material. So indeed, the stress is going to increase, and in the real cell, it's going to increase some material. But the trend is still that the stress is going to increase. And it's probably a threshold beyond which you can't synthesize as much as, or enough to resist the stress level. Yep. But I think Vidya has also...
I'm probably making too much of a connection here, but this seems to happen only in the leaf, correct? These kind of cells?
Yeah, but not only actually, but yeah, mostly in the leaves, yeah.
But connecting it to this business of if you want, otherwise the structural stability, you need too much cellulose or whatever. The only other way to get it. You can't have too much cellulose in a leaf because it's photosynthetic, and the thick cellulose will prevent efficient photosynthesis because it will block the light.
Not necessarily. So cellulose is transparent, huh? In a way.
It is, but as you increase thickness, the intensity of
so
light...
I have I heard somewhere, but I'm not completely sure it's true. So there is one species where this happens actually, where you have this huge cell. It's called Tradescantia, and they have this huge cell that are like bulging out like this, and they have a very thick wall. But actually, what happens is that this thick wall actually is thought to act as a lens that is concentrating the light to the chloroplast, apparently. So sometimes some additional benefits of having the wrong strategy in a way. But, let me go back. But I'll, yeah. Okay, so here you see that's one strategy to keep. So if you want, yeah, maybe the soap bubble analogy is a better analogy actually. So if you want to, if you have a small soap bubble, it's going to be resistant in a way. If you make a big soap bubble, it's going to explode much more easily. This is something that everyone has experienced. So this is basically what this model is saying. Yeah? That's what it's saying. But actually, when you grow in one direction, then there is a small curvature here, and then the cell, the stress level is going to be low. So now you compare with this pavement cell and non-lobed cells, and you see that indeed the big cell have a super high stress, whereas here the stress has been reduced quite a bit. So why would you have a pavement cell like this? Actually, it comes down to growth direction. Maybe I should show actually this. So in this case, you have cells that are going in one direction. So growth is very anisotropic. And so when growth is very anisotropic, the cell is going in this direction, the stress level is low, there is no problem. The problem is when growth is isotropic. So when you have a cell like this, and you want to grow in all directions, so you can do that, but then you're going to have a lot of stress. Or you can do this pavement cell, so you grow in a little bit in all directions, but you only make small arches, if you want, small curvature everywhere, and you're going to decrease the stress level, as you can see here, right? So it's like it's as if you were growing elongated cells in all directions, and that way you reduce the stress levels. Is that clear enough? I'm not sure I'm so clear. Yeah. So actually, this is something that we can indeed correlate. So we can measure growth directions and see whether we see more or less lobed cells. And this, to cut a long story short, this is the case. So when you have growth that is really isotropic, you have lobed cells, and when growth is more anisotropic, you have elongated cells. So in both cases, we've reduced the stress level, but through two different strategies, right? But by controlling the cell shape, you reduce the stress levels. So of course, there is a third strategy, which is to keep dividing, right? And this is probably what the animal cells or the animal systems have developed, is that they keep dividing, so they have small cells all the time, or most of the time, and that way they keep the stress level low. The minute you want to make a big cell, then you're going to fall into this, right? You'll have to control the shape so that the stress level is as low as possible. And there's, of course, one extra example. So I'm showing this because I showed you the first day when you depolymerize the microtubule. Remember, in the topical meristems, the cells are behaving like 2D foam, like soap bubbles, basically. And actually, if you let the cells grow enough, actually, the white stars here are exploding cells. So finally, the cells are exploding, and it's always the biggest one that are exploding. So this is like a sort of experimental proof, but indeed, those cells are very fragile, and the stress level has increased. So we think, in this case, that one of the main functions of this puzzle-shaped cells is to decrease the stress level. Again, when I talk about mechanical signals, it always comes down to this. The cells have to resist mechanical stress. So they do it through very different ways. They align their microtubule, their cellulose, but they also do it by controlling their shape. And their shape is actually a good prescriptor of stress levels as well. Yep. So in this case, this is in 2D. So actually, they are about 5 to 10 micrometer thick in Arabidopsis, and it's just like so they are like this, right? So I don't know. So it's if you add a 2D surface with this shape and you were extruding it by 5-10 micrometer, it would be that's the shape of the cells. So it's like really flat,
like a cylinder kind of thing. Just one more question.
Yep.
So how does the length scale of the curvature compare to, for example, the persistence length of microtubules?
Oh, well, that I don't know.
Or give me an estimate of this.
Yeah, I have no idea. The microtubules, it's in the micrometer range, I think, in plants. Persistent length. No, actually, I don't remember. No, I don't want to say it. I would have to put it. I can tell you. Okay, so that's for the pavement cell. So this is just one illustration. When you have, let's say, an example of cell shapes, you can look at it at the molecular level, but actually introducing some mechanics can help you understand the system a bit better. That was the main take-home message here. Okay, so now I just want to, but I don't think I'll have time to go through it, so I'm going to go a little bit fast. I've been talking a lot about microtubules, so I just want to expand this to other systems. And so one of them is cell division. So in animals, there's a lot of data showing that cell division is under mechanical control. So these are a few examples. So for instance, here you grow a cell on a micro pattern. So there is an adhesive pattern behind, and you see that based on the pattern, you can always predict in which direction the division plane is going to be oriented. This is from Manuel Terry. And actually, this comes down to when you adhere on the surface. This is transducing a pattern of force in the cell, of course, and this is transduced or transposed to the spindle, and the spindle is going to align with the stress pattern in the cell. So if you affect the stress pattern of the cell, you're going to affect the orientation of cell division. You can also affect the speed at which cells are dividing if you apply compression or tension on a cell. So the cells are really responding to a mechanical signal for their cell division. I'm going to skip one. So this we've also looked in the shoot apical meristem. So it's the same idea. I mentioned this very quickly yesterday. So this is again the shoot apical meristem. This is the boundary where the macrotubules are very well aligned. Okay. And so in plants, there is a rule that is very famous. It's called the Herrera's rule. So this is a rule that says that cells are dividing according to geometry. They choose the shortest path. So the homologous in animals would be Herdwick's rule. I don't know if you heard about this, but that's basically the same idea. You divide along the shortest path. So this is a purely geometrical rule. You divide along the shortest path. There's a lot of data showing that indeed it's true. So if you look at cell divisions, on average in plants, they always divide along the shortest path. So, okay. The only problem with this is that this rule has been tested on tissues with rather homogeneous growth, or no big differential in growth rates, and also on tissues that are either flat, like leaves, or the dome of the shoot apical meristem, so something with a rather isotropic shape. So the heterogeneity has not really been taken into account for this rule. So here we have the luxury of having a system that is immediately accessible. The epidermis is right here, and here we have high differential growth. So here this is the crease here. So the growth is very very low, and this is growing very fast. This is growing faster. So this is really the slow growing zone. Yep. Oh, okay, so sorry, yeah, should I say? So periclinal wall, that's the top wall. That's the wall at the surface. So that's the wall you're seeing here. All the surface, these are periclinal. So this is parallel to the surface. And anticlinal is perpendicular to the surface. So these are the vertical walls. So here I'm only looking at the periclinal wall, the outer wall. So here we have differential growth. So I'm going to go a bit quickly because I think you can see me coming. So we've measured growth. I'm going to go straight to the cell division. And what we find actually is that in this domain, the cells are dividing along one of the longest plane. So we are not dividing along one of the shortest plane. So maybe you see here, there is a cell that has divided not too long ago, and there is a long plane here. There's another long plane here, another long plane here. So those cells that are really like in the site of tissue folding, where there's a lot of tension, and tension is in this direction, the cells have divided along one of the longest plane. So against Herrera's rule. So of course, we are tempted to put out a new rule that says that plant cells are dividing along the maximal tension and not according to geometry, but actually according to tension. So we can make a few tests to see if it's not completely crazy. So of course, we can go back to our ablations, kill a cell. This is going to induce a circumferential stress pattern around the dead cells. And when we measure the new cell division, so this is what you see here. So these are real images, it's just the quantification. You see that the new cell division are indeed becoming circumferential. So by locally changing the stress pattern, tension becomes circumferential, and the new cell division, so most of them are at 90 degrees, so 90 degrees is this angle, right? So most of them are circumferential. So they're following the maximal tension. And there is another case where it's very clear. So maybe you remember the QA1 mutant with the cracks that were like showing the stress pattern. So in the stem, the tension is like this. And when we look at cell division in this tissue, we see that most cell division actually are following maximal tension and not always along the shortest path. For instance, this cell here is divided along one of the longest paths, and there's a few like this. So it seems that indeed tension is following, that the cell division is following maximal tension, not cell geometry. So how can we reconcile still, because Herrera's rule, I mean, people have seen this for years, so how can we reconcile all this? This is actually very simple. If you have one cell that is growing like this, and if it starts to elongate, again, it's the cylinder, the sausage on the barbecue, tension is going to be twice higher in this direction. And then this direction is also the shortest path. So that means that if there is nothing else, if you just have one cell that is growing in a homogeneous tissue, like in a tissue that is growing homogeneously, maximal tension is also going to be the shortest path. And the cell is going to divide along the shortest path and the maximal tension. Now, if you have a cell that is next to a cell that is growing much faster, for instance, So this cell here is going to grow faster, so it's going to pull on that wall, right? A little bit like in the trichome example, in the sepal. And if it pulls strong enough, then the macrotubule and the cell division is going to align to whatever maximal tensions it sees. And so if the maximal tension is this one, so stronger than the one that is prescribed by cell shape, then the cell is going to divide along this direction. And so in this case, the cell is dividing along maximal tension, but not according to cell geometry. So what can prescribe this alternative tension, I would say? So one cell can grow faster than a neighbor, so this is differential growth. But you can also have an effect of tissue shape, so at the multicellular scale. So if you have an epidermis under tension, and you have this saddle shape like this, tension is also going to be like this. So if you have both differential growth plus the tissue shape that is going to prescribe the tension in this direction, like in the shoot apical meristem, like in the boundary, in the saddle shape zone, then the cells are only going to divide along one of the longest plane in this case. Okay, so this is for cell division, and I'm going to fast track the rest, but I think I already fast tracked it in my slide. So this was for cell division. So, and I showed you that pretty much in animal cells it's the same. So the animal cells are also dividing according to tension. But actually, there's more to this. So this is a classic example, I would say, from the team of Dennis Discher. Cell fate. Is cell fate under mechanical control? So if you put a stem cell, an animal stem cell on the substrate, same chemistry of the substrate, but you change the stiffness of the medium, of the matrix. So if you put that stem cell on a soft medium, that cell is going to differentiate into a neuron. And if you put the same cell on a stiff medium, it's going to differentiate into an osteoblast. And these results are a little bit debated, I must say. But still, if we trust it, I mean, there has been some follow-up papers, so I think it's true. Only by changing the mechanical environment of the cell, you can change the fate of the cell. And actually, what they showed in this team is that everything is scaling to the environment. So if you put a cell on a stiff matrix, the extracellular matrix of the cell is becoming stiffer. The cytoskeleton is getting more dense. The nucleus also is getting stiffer because there is more lamine in the nucleus. So everything is scaling to the mechanical environment. And so you can imagine that this is going to have this is going to have a strong impact on the chromatin, on gene expression. And so it's not completely absurd to think that this is going to affect cell fate in the end. Cell division we saw, and cell polarity. So this is also, cell polarity is controlled a lot by mechanical forces. So this is just one example. So you have one cell in an hydrodynamic flow. And you see that if you put that cell in this flow, actin is going to go on that side, and the cell is going to try to crawl against the flow, again, resisting mechanical stress, right? Going against the force. And here you induce polarity only with a mechanical cue. And so just to cut a long story short, so we showed that indeed it's the same in plants, so we can see, or it's the same, at least that's what we can say. So there's some, when I say we, it's we and others, we, the plant community. We see some gene expression that are induced by mechanical stress, so some important genes like homeobox genes, for instance, in plants, some of them are induced by mechanical stress. And we also see that some cell polarity is also in part controlled by mechanical stress. That you can have some polar markers that are recruited preferentially on the most tensed membrane. So this means that, and this is not really a surprise, forces are in animals, they're in plants, they're everywhere, in bacteria. So all this, there is no reason to think that it would not be conserved. And I think I won't have time for this mechanotransduction pathways. 4 minutes, or maybe I can go very quickly. Yeah, trying to think if I can abstract this a little bit. Well, maybe I can just show you this. So 15 more minutes. Okay. Well, I guess we had a few questions during the talk, but yeah. Okay, I'll go a little bit faster for this. Why do I talk about mechanotransduction pathway? Because so far I've been telling you that okay, there is mechanical stress in the tissue. The cells are able to respond to this mechanical stress, to these forces, through their cytoskeleton aligning with the force, but also gene expression, polarity. So pretty much every cell function is in part controlled by mechanical stress. If we really want to integrate mechanical forces or mechanical stress in the gene network, we need to know how mechanical stress is perceived in cells. That's really the only way you can connect the two and see the coupling between the two pathways. And so what we need is this, basically. So you have shape growth, you can prescribe stress from the shape and growth, you can see the targets, the molecular targets of this stress, but we absolutely need this to have the full connection, right? So in animals, there's a lot of data on this, and I'm going to, directly go to this one. So this is from the team of Emmanuel Farge. So this is in Drosophila. There is this, during gastrulation, there is this domain that expresses twist. And actually what Emmanuel showed is that actually this domain is under compression, and that compression is inducing twist, which is a patterning gene that is very important for mesoderm differentiation. So this is a mechanosensitive gene. It actually showed that there is an homologous of twist that is called no-tail in fish that is induced during epiboly, which is another name for gastrulation in fish or in zebrafish. And it's also induced by mechanical compression. And actually what's spectacular is that it's induced through the same mechanotransduction pathway. In this case, it's a beta-catenin dependent mechanotransduction pathway. So what I want to say with this slide is that in animals, we know a lot, actually. There's a lot of known stuff on mechanotransduction. So this is one example. Another example, which is even better known, is the focal adhesion point for instance, fibroblasts. So if you have a cloning cell, so this is just an image of fibroblast, and here this is the point where the cell is adhering as it's going back. So we know a lot of the proteins that are involved, and one of them that is really important is the integrin. So this is a transmembrane domain that is binding to the extracellular matrix. And what happens here is that it's binding to fibronectin. And so if you stretch the substrate, so if you stretch the fibronectin, you unmask some domain, like a RGD binding domain, and then integrin can bind to this. And by doing this, it changes conformation, and then up you have a transduction that is following, right? A regular cascade. Then the cytoskeleton is going to change it. You see that actually this is a good example to show that mechanotransduction is not exotic. It's really like a regular transduction pathway with a ligand. So when you have a ligand binding to a receptor, the receptor is changing protein conformation, and this is what is transducing cascade. In the case of mechanotransduction, you don't need a ligand. You stretch the protein directly, right? You change the protein conformation directly, and this is going to induce the same pathway in the end. So this is not like, you don't have to think as mechanotransduction as something very weird or something. It's very, very similar in some ways at the chemical level. Okay, I'm going to skip all this. Only have 20 seconds left. So I want to go to the plant stuff. So in plants, we know much less, but well, we still have some cues. So there are some receptor-like kinases that are the plasma membrane that can bind the cell wall and have intracellular transduction. So this would be a little bit equivalent to the integrin that I showed earlier. We also have some mechanosensitive channels, so channels that are open primarily when there is a tension in the membrane, and there's also some secondary messengers. But I just want to show you one example, and I think I'm going to stop with this one. This is DEC1, so this is a mutant. So what you're, maybe I should start with the wild type. So this is a seed, an immature seed in plant, in Arabidopsis. This is the embryo with the two young leaves, and this is the root, mostly, and then a little bit of the stem. And all this is the nutrition tissue, let's say. And this is the envelope of the seed. So this is the wild type. You see that the two leaves are here. And this is a DEC1 mutant, so defective kernel. And it's an embryo that is basically not going beyond that stage. So it's actually what happens in this embryo is that it's not making an epidermis. And because it's not making an epidermis, it stops very early on, and then it dies, basically. And so to cut a long story short, DEC1 actually is associated with the calcium mechanosensitive channel activity. And so this is really interesting because, for several reasons. So, but one of them is that there is no epidermis in this mutant, and I showed you that the epidermis in plants is under tension. And so here we can make the correlation that you need to perceive tension to make an epidermis, because this is a mechanosensitive protein, right? And it's really like a mechanosensitive channel. It's really clearly linked to mechanical stress, right? It's really perceiving tension. In this case, in this mutant, you don't perceive tension, at least in this case, and you don't make an epidermis. So apparently to make an epidermis, you need to perceive tension. The other thing that is interesting, just to make again the analogy with the animals, maybe I have the shape of the protein. This is the DEC1 protein. It has an intracellular domain that is a calpain, so it's a protease. Okay, it doesn't matter, but actually in animals, there's also a calpain domain, calpain, but it's a free protein. It's not associated with this huge transmembrane domain here. And actually what's acting upstream of calpain in animals is piezo, which is a calcium mechanosensitive channel. There seems to be like some conservation during evolution. It's just two different proteins, but actually maybe the only difference is that calpain has been fused with the mechanosensor, if you want, in plants, whereas in animals you have the mechanosensitive channels and the calpain, which would be the transducer of the stress. And maybe I should stop. Yeah, maybe I should stop here. Thank you.
Questions?
So yeah, the puzzle cells, like with those weird shapes, are only in the epidermis or also beneath?
Yeah, they're only in the epidermis. Actually, when you make a section through the mesophyll or the leaf, you have this envelope of pavement cells that are really tightly connected. And then underneath, you have these cells that are loosely connected. And actually, they are more spherical, I would say. Of course, it's not completely true. They are a little bit deformed, but yeah, maybe I should. So you have the epidermis like this, with the anticlinal wall, and the mesophyll is a lot more like this. And when you think about it, actually, it sort of makes sense because here you have some stomata, so you need to have some gas exchange, and actually all these gaps here are highways for gas through the leaf. So here the adhesion between cells is much less. They still don't move, huh? They're still glued, huh? But there is more space between the cells, and so these cells have a very different shape.
So, is there any differential growth between epidermis cells and those cells that could make that epidermis cells are also under tension and got those shapes?
Yeah, so that's the idea. Is that when you have these cells under compression, we actually think that these cells are actually pushing on the epidermis. The thing, though, is that measuring the growth of these cells is much harder than the one at the epidermis. So actually, most of the data we have actually is on the epidermis only. Yeah, in this case, yeah, I draw them because usually the epidermal cells are much flatter. Like they are 5 to 10 micrometer wide, at least in Arabidopsis, and these ones are usually a bit bigger. Yeah.
You know, that determines the shape, and the shape gives a feedback to the microtubule orientation. Mm-hmm. And if you stop that by the inhibitor, urasidinol or something? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So is it reversible?
Yes, it is reversible. So what happens actually is very interesting. So if you remove the microtubules, so the cells are growing isotropically, and then you let the microtubule come back. Actually, what happens is that the microtubules are going to align to the new shape of the cell. So if these are really big cells, like a balloon, they're going to the microtubules are going to be like this, actually, like a circumferential, because it's like a little dome, if you want. And so they're going to align like this for a while. And then when they've been like this for a while, then they're going to align as the tissue is growing with the supracellular stress afterwards. So you can see different stages of alignment with maximal tension. But the first one is the cell level and then the tissue level.
No, so the reason I was asking is so we have a line where you can induce maturity. So when the leaf is really, really small in the primordial stage, if you induce once by few hours the maturity, this is a maturity gene, whatever it is, and then you withdraw, it doesn't come back to the proliferation stage. Just so I was wondering whether their microtubule gets irreversibly reoriented or something.
Well, they have the ability to come back in. I mean, they are reversible, I would say. But in your case, maybe it's, there is a lot of evidence now that when you differentiate the cell wall, actually you also send a lot of signal for differentiation. And that could be reversible in a way. So like you really help the cell to differentiate and might not be.
No, so other question I had is during the cell division, that time also cells increase in size, but you don't see this, squiggly thingy.
No.
So is it because it's too small, or is it because the cell wall of the dividing cell is different and you don't have that, the tough and the soft thing?
Okay. So it's true that the new cell wall are super soft, and very homogeneous. So there will not be this
So they
type
won't
of
be
growth
high.
behavior. Yeah, but it's also because they are not so big. And you see that the pavement cell, they start when they're like maybe 3 times the size. Or,
Hello? Yeah. So I was thinking in the leaf primordium, we know where the leaves, like if a first leaf forms, there is a particular pattern in which the new leaves form, right? So if we make some kind, if we put some pressure at a different, position different than where the leaf is going to form. Now, will the leaf form there? Like, will the organ form at that?
very, very good point. So this has been a long-standing question. So so this is the question of phyllotaxis in a way, the architecture of leaves, the fact that most species the spiral pattern, and this being impacted by mechanical forces. So we've worked on this, but others have worked on this as well. And the answer is no, actually. So when you change the shape of the meristem, when you affect, you make mechanical perturbation, you do a lot of stuff. Actually, the auxin peaks and the leaf primordial position is very robust. It's always at the predicted position. Even if you've messed up the meristem, it's still going to have overall, there may be some mistake, but it keeps the same thing. So our idea is that in this case, the molecular patterning is dominating over mechanical signaling in this case. And this is definitely one case where it's, mechanics has probably a lower role.
So I have one more question. So in case of yeast budding, so the position where the bud will come, does it, maybe yeast people also can answer. So the position where the bud is going to come, is it defined by this microtubule, this tension and all?
But I don't know. I know that there's been some AFM done on budding yeast, and to show that there is apparently some, I don't want to say a mechanical signal, but the properties of the wall after a bud actually is remaining for a while, and so this has been proposed to maybe be a cube. I heard that in a conference at some point, that you have like I don't know, like the mark of the previous budding that could be used, but this part, that I don't know.
Thank you.
In fly wing discs, when you make clones of mutant cells randomly within the disc and allow the disc to grow normally, there is a recovery. I mean, the shape and size is more or less the same. Is it possible to make clones in plants, and is shape still reproducible when you have clones of mutants?
Yeah, so you can do, what's often used is the Krelok system. So you make a mosaic, in a way, like a chimera. So what happens, so actually this is something that's been done in several labs. And again, we can see compensation. So for a while, so you have cells that are maybe growing faster, like let's say the GFP positive ones, or like the one that are induced. They're going to grow faster, but actually what happens is that the other one are going to maybe resist or communicate with those cells, and in the end, you don't have such a strong effect. We did this with expansins, for instance, so that's a protein that is increasing the growth rate, softening the cell wall. So when you do this, the cells that are induced are growing indeed faster for 24 hours, and then the next 24 hours, these are the cells that are growing the slowest. And so on average, for 48 hours, nothing has changed. So it's just a cycle.
So even if you vary cell growth rate at different places, you're still able to...
We haven't analyzed in a different part of the leaf or the sepal. But so far, I mean, if you look at the literature, compensation is really strong. Really dominates, I would say.
Then let's thank Olivia once again, and we'll break for tea. We'll meet at 5.
Thank you.